So I have made an unexpected purchase and we need to talk about it. I was in town the other day running errands, minding my own business, and I had on my planning that I would pop into our version of Sephora because I wanted to smell a couple of perfumes firsthand, especially a couple of Tom Ford scents because I was just intrigued to smell them myself. And while I was in store, I had sniffed the perfumes, I had already picked out my favorite, it was waiting for me at the cashiers, and then I decided to do a little tour around the rest of the store and see what's new, what's interesting, just, you know, have a look. Then just as I was about to, you know, call it a day, go pay for my perfume and head out, I noticed that they had on display the new Guerlain Ombres G, I think they're called the Ombres G because that's what the packaging tells me, the new Ombres G Quads. Now these have been out for a little bit now, at least a couple of months, and they sort of had attracted my attention because based on photos, it looked like they were in that sweet baked gelée formula, very reminiscent of Tom Ford's eyeshadow formula, and honestly a lot of the quads looked like really fun color stories. Now they do come in like at least 6 or 7 varieties, and I swatched a bunch of them when I was in store. Actually I swatched only a couple, but I was immediately attracted to 2 of them. One had a really bright blue in it, and like a green and an orange and a deep brown. And I swatched the blue shade because I was very curious whether it is as reminiscent in real life as it is from the photos to Blitz Blue from Pat McGrath. Honestly, from what I could tell from simply swatching them, they were actually quite similar. So not to say that you should go grab the quad just for that blue eyeshadow, because in terms of price these are actually more expensive than Pat McGrath's mothership eyeshadows, but just to say that in terms of color story it was very attracting to me because Blitz Blue is one of the most attracting shades to me in the Subliminal palette. Now I did not go for that quad in the end because I have Blitz Blue and I don't really feel the need to have another one. Ultimately I decided to just admire that quad from afar because in terms of like the combination of colors, it was just a bit all over the place for me. It was a bit like too many different colors that in terms of like a quad would require you to pull out something else. And when I purchase these types of like little quads, I actually like to have shades that work together very nice, that are very cohesive, that are not over the top colorful, just something really quick and easy. But anyway, that was not even the most interesting part, because when I started swatching these eyeshadows, honestly I was like, let's just see how they feel like and, you know, whether they're even worth considering the possibility of purchasing them. And then I swatched a couple of the eyeshadows and I was very pleasantly surprised because they did in fact very much remind me of the Wet and Dry formula from Tom Ford, which we are going to compare to in a little bit. And what I found even more surprising is that compared to the Wet and Dry formula, where you basically get the same formula, it felt like here you're getting different types of formulas. The quad that I picked out specifically has, I think, at least 3 different textures in it. Like, not textures, but like 3 different formulas. In terms of textures, they're all the beautiful baked gelée formula, I can confirm that for a fact. But there is a bit more variety in the formulas of these eyeshadows, which I found very intriguing. And one of the eyeshadows that I swatched from the quad that I purchased was also a very sparkly shade, and I was just very surprised at how smooth, beautiful, and not boring these were. Like, I fully expected these to be like super boring, and they were anything but boring. So I was so inspired that I asked the sales girl whether these were also included in the sale, because there was a 20% sale running like of the whole store, and she said that they are in fact included. So I was like, great, then pack this one up for me please. Unfortunately, because these are so new here, she didn't really have them in store yet. The eyeshadows were already on display, but the actual palettes were not in store. So I decided, you know, I'm just going to go home and see whether I can order these online. Unfortunately, online they were not on sale, so I thought I'm just going to wait a little bit and order these at a later point. However, our alternate version of Sephora, because we have several stores here, well, not several, we have 2 stores here that are basically like our version of Sephora. They were actually on sale online in the other store already for 25% off. Now, let me say, in terms of price, these are as pricey as Tom Ford's eyeshadow quads. They cost about 73 euros here in the Netherlands, and with the 25% off I paid about 56 euros for these quads. So they're by no means cheap. If you compare them to a mothership palette from Pat McGrath, a mothership palette from Pat McGrath is a far better investment, but it really depends on what you're looking for, what your style is, and what you expect of these eyeshadows. I've honestly never been intrigued by luxury brand eyeshadow formulas before, like the classic ones like Chanel, Dior, Guerlain, because they've always seemed like too subtle for my taste. But I feel like lately these brands have been like upping their game, because Chanel recently released these like tweed quads, which seem to be also in the baked gelée formula, and I'm a sucker for the baked gelée formula. And since Pat McGrath robbed me of my baked gelée formula experience with Mothership 10, I felt like I needed to compensate with something. But either way, it was just a very spontaneous purchase of something that I just fell in love with quite unexpectedly. So now that I have rambled for a full-on 7 minutes without even showing you what I bought, let me just show you what I bought. I purchased the quad in the shade Royal Jungle, so that is 940 Royal Jungle. It came in a beautiful little black pouch like this, very luxurious. The actual outer packaging of the quad is like entirely gold. It collects prints, of course, immediately, but it feels weighty but not too weighty. It feels plasticky but not too cheapy plasticky. Honestly, in terms of its weight, it's quite reminiscent of the Tom Ford quads. The Tom Ford quads have just slightly more weight to them, but this still feels very luxurious in the hand. It has the Guerlain logo here, and also there's written out Guerlain here. It came with, like, of course, the standard applicators that I already removed. It also came with a little plastic protector that I also removed, and this is the color story of the eyeshadow quad that I purchased. As you can see, it is fairly neutral, nothing really exciting in terms of colors. There's a really dark brown, like a more neutrally gold shade, a beautiful chocolate brown, and this toppery type of shade. So let's swatch the 4 eyeshadows, and then I'm going to talk a bit about the formula and compare it to the Tom Ford Wet and Dry formula. So these are little finger swatches. Let me go ahead and swatch them for you. So this is the chocolate brown, this is the toppery-like shade, the dark brown, and the gold. And because the natural light that I get in my room at this time of the day is not very conducive to really like appreciating fully the textures of these eyeshadows, I'm going to try and add on a little bit of artificial light here, because especially that topper shade is so impressive. It has the most beautiful like gold and lilac sparkle in it, like not chunky glitter, but definitely a gorgeous sparkly toppery eyeshadow. And as I mentioned, I feel like there are 3 different types of formulas in here. And why do I say this? So the gold shade and the brown shade are pretty much the same formula. They're that beautiful like wet and dry type formula that just is very smooth, very smoothing also on the lid. It doesn't have a lot of glitter, it doesn't really have too much of a metallic sheen, which is also the case for the wet and dry formula from Tom Ford. They do have a bit of a metallic sheen, but it's not ultra metallic like an actual like Pat McGrath metallic shade or something. It's just due to the nature of the formula. I think baked shadows just do not have the capacity to be this metallic, but they do have the advantage of being extremely smooth, very flattering on the lid, very forgiving on textured lids. And again, it is such a shame that you can't really see how pretty and sparkly it is, but this shade is definitely one of those like more translucent base packed with micro glitter in it, and it is absolutely beautiful. I was so mesmerized by that eyeshadow when I swatched it in store. I promise you it looks really boring, but on the lid it's really going to come to life, especially if you stand in artificial lighting or sunlight. And what I found really intriguing, this shadow here, the deep brown, this one has almost like a cream to powder texture to it. It's slightly putty feeling, and it's definitely not like these two or this one. It's definitely like a beast of its own, which I found very intriguing for like a little quad to have 3 different eyeshadow formulas in it. I think that's really, really lovely. And also, even though the eyeshadows in here are quite neutral and nothing groundbreaking in terms of their colors, I still feel like you can create quite a variety of different looks because of the different depths that you're given. You're given this extremely deep dark eyeshadow that you can use as a, you know, something for a smoky eye. You can use to push into your lash line. If you want to create a bit more like definition there, you can use to wing a liner. You know, an eyeshadow like this is really useful to have in such a small format. I love that there is a topper shade, so in case you wanted to add that extra glitz, you always have the option to. And I love that these two are such complementary tones, but they're still pretty neutral in their tones, and they're that formula that you can literally whack on your lid with a finger, just slightly blend it out and be out the door, and it's going to look absolutely fabulous. You can do like a very deep smoky eye if you use these two shades. You can do something very daytime appropriate if you just put this one or this one on your lid. You can always opt for putting this one over top of either of these two or this one to create different effects. So, you know, I see this quad and I see many possibilities, and I find that very inspiring. When I know for a fact that there is a Tom Ford quad in the Wet and Dry formula with a very similar color story to this. I don't have that quad, so unfortunately I can't compare. If I had that quad, I probably wouldn't have purchased this one because I really don't like to dupe myself to that level. But I do have some other like more neutral leaning quads from him. So I'm going to open here Body Heat, and I just want to show you in terms of texture how similar these look. I think even visually you can tell that they look very, very similar to each other. Now, none of the eyeshadows in here are quite similar in terms of color, so I'm just going to swatch this one and this one, which could be considered similar to, I don't know, this one and this one in the Guerlain Quad. So this is the one from Tom Ford, this is the one from Guerlain. You can see they're quite similar to each other, quite honestly. The difference is the tone, the Tom Ford one being a bit more like a ruddy, rusty, browny red, whereas this one is more of your classic neutral chocolate brown. So I'm just going to swatch these here next to each other, so you can also see in terms of texture how incredibly similar they are. I hope that it's coming across a little bit, at least on camera, that this one is quite much more of like a topper sparkly type of shade, whereas the one from Tom Ford is really like one of that smooth Wet and Dry type formulas. Let me see if I can show you with a little bit of artificial light what I'm talking about. God, this is difficult. Like the Tom Ford eyeshadows, they do have a like subtle sparkle to them, but I feel like the shade from the Guerlain Quad, this one is definitely much less subtle in terms of its sparkle. And now it is time to zoom you in so that we can do a little look testing these eyeshadows. Okay, so what I think I'm going to do is, obviously I want to use all the 4 shades. I want to put this one on the outer part of my eye and just like blend it out lightly. This one in the inner portion of my eye, blend it out lightly. This one in the inner corner, and also a little bit over top of both of these two to create like a little shimmer veil. And I want to try this one to create like that thick blocky eyeliner that I've loved wearing the last couple of months, and we shall just take it from there, see how it goes, see how it looks. I'm really excited. So I'm basically going to take the brown shade here, and I am going to apply it just with my finger on half of my lid, and I'm going to blend it out afterwards. And this goes on very smooth, very pigmented, with just the tiniest bit of shine on it. Probably if you put a glitter glue underneath, the shine will be even more prominent. But for now, I don't really feel like applying any sort of glitter glue. And so far they're indeed quite reminiscent of the Wet and Dry from Tom Ford. And now I'm going to just start lightly blending this out. I'm not really going to take another matte to put through the crease, because I know from experience that these types of formulas tend to blend out pretty easily and can be manipulated to be, you know, quite much softer in your crease without the need to pull out a transition matte shade or something. So I'm just going to lightly blend that upwards. And you can see these are, you know, quite malleable in that way. You can really make them work beautifully through your crease without having the need to pull out anything else. And I love the tone. It's sort of like that beautiful, a little bit red toned chocolate brown. Really lovely. Next I'm going to go into the gold shade and basically do the same. I'm going to apply this here into the inner portion of the lid. Again, a gold that I think is going to make a lot of people happy because it is not very yellow toned. It has slightly orange tones to it, a bit more neutral. Definitely a more toned down shade. Now I am going to pull out a little bit of Pat McGrath's Intensifies because the glittery shade I feel like is going to benefit from a little bit more stick. So I'm going to shove that here into my inner corners. And I'm also going to apply it here where the two eyeshadows meet and lightly over top of like both. And now just using my fingers, I'm taking the little toppery type shade and I'm going to apply that here over top of basically most of the lid because I'm just really curious how it's going to look like. It's not a Pat McGrath glittery topper, but it is very soft and very pretty. This is very pretty. Like really marries the two shades together very beautifully. Taking a smaller type brush and I'm just going to shove that shade also into the inner corners here. And last but certainly not least, I'm going to take this tiny liner brush and I'm going to go into the deep brown shade and we will see whether I can apply this here as a little bit of like a blocky wing. There is literally no kick up. I've like been shoving my brush into here and you can see that there's really no kick up. These three, especially this one, the more glittery one, you can see slightly more kick up and texture because of the fact that it's more glittery. And this one, like I said, because it feels like a cream to powder and a bit more like a putty type of texture, there's literally zero kick up, which is really good because if you're going to do this with a really dark eyeshadow, you really don't want that to like drip all over your face. And this is applying really nicely. Again, it's not like super punchy, which I really like. You can control a little bit the application so that it's a bit more subtle, but at the same time it has quite a bit of nice depth to it to complement the rest of the shades. I'm also going to take this shade a little bit here onto my lower lashes. On like the outer third, I think on the inner third I'm going to go with maybe the chocolate brown again, because that one is also very pretty. They're just such like easy textures to work with. That's what I really like about these types of formulas. They're just an absolute no-brainer to work with. Alright, I'm dipping that same brush into the chocolate brown and I'm just going to shove that here on the rest of my lower lashes. I don't know whether that's doing anything. I hope it is. Don't expect Pat McGrath type of glitter, but there is a beautiful like layer of sparkle over my whole lid. So to conclude, a pretty, nothing groundbreaking in terms of colors look, but just so easy, and these textures are just so lightweight and airy on the lids. I think these quads and these types of eyeshadow textures really are geared towards people who find intense metallic eyeshadows, think classic, you know, indie eyeshadows, and a lot of like Pat McGrath's metallic eyeshadow formulas to just be too much and too texturizing on the lids. These are made for the consumer who wants something quick, easy, pretty, with just a touch of, you know, glitz, but then also not too much, because these are beautiful. The topper shade here is so pretty, but it is nothing like a glitter topper, like an Astro shade from Pat McGrath. If you struggle with the Astro shades from Pat McGrath because they're chunky, extremely glittery, and extremely in your face, then this is going to be like a perfect middle ground. It's a little bit shiny, it's a little bit interesting, but not too interesting. I quite like this. I think in terms of like neutral eyeshadows, these are my kind of tones, so I can easily incorporate this into my daily life, especially if I'm in a hurry and I don't want to fuck around. I like all the textures in here, all the colors. I'm really so fond of this like body like cream to powder brown shade, because it is just so much easier to work with this kind of texture than like a true matte eyeshadow in this formula, which can get, you know, patchy, it can like fly all over your face, it's more difficult to work with. This is just such a no-brainer to work with, and then just counts for all of the eyeshadows in here. They're just so easy to work with. I cannot stress this enough. Overall, I think these are, in terms of quality, on par with the Tom Ford Wet n Dry eyeshadow formulas. If there was one of these color stories that really spoke to you and you're not bothered by the price, then I think you're going to enjoy this. If you enjoy Tom Ford's Wet n Dry formula, you are going to enjoy these because they're pretty much about the same. I'm getting a little bit hungry. I think it's time for me to go get lunch, so I'm going to wrap this video up. Please let me know what you thought about the look that I created with this palette. Do let me know if you picked up any of these quads and what do you think about them, or are you planning on picking any of them up? I'm just very curious to, you know, exchange thoughts with you in the comments. As usual, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!